Good morning. You're listening to KSQD Santa Cruz, KSQD 90.7 FM and streaming at ksqd.org. I'm Stephen E. Popp, and this is In the Garden. On this show, along with Joe Truskot, every Saturday morning, we bring on experienced, knowledgeable guests to talk about a broad spectrum of gardening, horticulture, and environmental topics. This Saturday is our second show of the new year, 2023, and it also marks the 7-month point since the show expanded from a half an hour to our 1 hour long format. It also marks the 7-month point since I joined the show, thanks to a gracious invitation from my friend and colleague, Joe Truskot.
I needed cheap labor.
I want Joe and all of you to know what a privilege and an honor it is for me to be a KSQD programmer and to share these Saturday mornings with you. Joe has patiently shown me the ropes as I engineer the show and co-host with hopefully fewer and fewer faux pas than when I started. So once again, I just wanted to take this moment to say thank you. Now, speaking of experienced and knowledgeable guests, Joe Truskot, in addition to being a radio personality of renown, is also a master rosarian. And since we didn't feel like making anybody else suffer to come through the weather here today, he's going to enlighten us this morning with all we need to know about winter rose care. So take it away, Joe.
Well, happy Saturday morning. The rain is still coming down. The originally scheduled pruning demonstration over at the Santa Cruz County Fairgrounds, our display garden, has been canceled wisely. There is lots of water coming down, so expect local flooding, expect high winds, high wind gusts coming through, and if at all possible, don't go near the ocean, folks. It's very dangerous. There's a high surf warning out as well.
Never turn your back.
And it looks like we're going to have rain coming down until about 1 o'clock, and then we're going to have scattered showers from now into the evening. The rain cell will probably be back. We're going to have wet weather off and on until Tuesday. We want those reservoirs to fill up because that means a good spring coming up. And we've got lots of aquifers that need some replenishing as well. Anyway, it's pruning time here on the Central Coast, and I thought I'd go over some basics of rose pruning. I will be, I'll let you know, at the San Lorenzo Nursery on River Street at 10:30 in 2 weeks' time, I believe it is. We'll give you an update later. But that's usually very popular. It wouldn't be so popular today, but it will be popular when the rains
You might be all alone today, John.
Oh, boy. At any rate, we certainly thank San Lorenzo Nursery for offering us a space.
Yes,
they're
indeed.
really wonderful hosts. At any rate, let's start the entire presentation. First of all, the question is, why do we prune our ever-blooming roses?
Oh, it's not what is a rose?
Yeah, well, we could go into nitrogen, but that's a later thing as well. But, you know, what I want to talk about is when we talk about roses, there are 150 different species roses, plus all of these hybrids and cross mixes. Most people, when you say rose, they're thinking hybrid tea. Yep. Maybe they're thinking floribunda, which is a multi-blossomed rose. And that's mostly what we're talking about. And then there's that category of shrub. Of course, all roses are shrubs.
We're talking garden variety then.
Yeah, and the ones that have been bred with the genes to make them bloom all season long. There are some other great roses, but they're one-time bloomers.
Yeah.
Now's not the time to touch them because you're going to be
important news. Okay.
you'll be pruning away the flowers that are coming in
Next
spring.
year, yeah.
They get pruned in July. So we're talking about the remontant or the
recurrent
blooming roses.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, why do we want to prune anyway? First of all, it's sanitation. And the second thing is we want to force dormancy, and we want to reshape the bush because they do put out canes. But from time to time, you need to stop and take a look at that bush and shape it a little bit. And the fourth one is we want sunlight because they grow all season, but we want sunlight to hit the graft at the soil level. So you want to open up the rows, and we'll get into that in just a second. So what are your favorite tools for pruning?
Well, my Fiskars and my Felcos, and if I'm going to go out and prune my roses, which I desperately need to do at this point in time, so I'm all ears this morning. I have a long-handled pair of pruners, which is pretty heavy duty to get those really beefy canes. And then I've got my handheld pruners. I do have a saw, but I've never used it on a rose.
Oh, that's because you don't feed your roses enough.
I guess not. Or
again, we're going back to nitrogen.
Oh, and I forgot the shovel for shovel pruning.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Shovel pruning. You get to the point where you've done everything you possibly could last year, and it got every disease known to roses, or it has sit and become a monster bush. I've had a couple of these. Absolutely beautiful, healthy green leaves. Where are the roses?
Oh, yeah.
It produced about 4.
Oh.
Well, you can't take that much space in Joe Truskot's garden and produce so few results.
Yeah,
so get that shovel and off we go.
Yep.
The other very important thing is some kind of sharpening tool. Corona makes one of those things. I'm not sure what you call it, but it's a tiny little thing. It's about
blade sharpener is what you're talking about.
Yeah,
so
Corona makes it's about 6 inches long, and it has a kind of little. It's some kind of hard metal.
Okay.
And
so it's like a file or of some sort of whetstone sharpener.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
It's in a little handheld device.
Exactly, and you can just hold on to it. Yeah. Hold on to your pruners and scrape that hard part of the sharpener against the edge of the blade. And man, I tell you, with just a few whacks, you got a really sharp.
And what I loved about the Corona was that you can take the blades off. They have screws so that you can replace a blade, because I have broken more than one blade.
Oh, in the shears.
Yes.
The shears. The Felco the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, just because I can. Just because I can't afford a BMW, I can afford a Felco made in Switzerland pruner with a long handle that fits my big fist. At any rate, it's very important. And trust me, don't spare any.
Don't go cheap. Don't go cheap.
Get a really good one and keep it
for life.
Keep it sharp. Make sure it has red handles. My green-handled Corona one.
They disappear.
I dug it up about 4 years later.
Yeah, been there, done that. Yeah, bright orange or red, please. Yes.
Yeah, you gotta have that. You will probably need some loppers. They really do work, and eventually, if you grow enough roses and you have trees on your property, one of those pruning saws, it's about that 18 inches maybe,
or longer. Okay.
Yeah, and it's curved. And the nice thing about a professional pruning saw is you pull and it cuts.
Right.
You don't push and it cuts, because you're likely to push stronger than you pull.
Yeah, don't use the chainsaw.
And exactly, you might end up, and been there, car, go right through stuff. Grandmother's advice: if you're out in the garden, wear sturdy shoes. None of these clogs or thongs or flip-flops. Put on
no
shoes.
open-toed. Yeah.
No, put on shoes. And grandmother's advice again: wear old clothes because you will tear them. It's very, very important that you also. I don't want to say, be careful around the roses, because even though it's wet outside and it's raining and they've had lots of nutrition, those prickles along the cane are very sharp and very dry and will rip your clothes and your skin. I usually end up, not too bad. I did some pruning
Oh, I thought that was
week.
your cat that did.
No. Those scratches on my arm are done with affection by my rose bushes.
There's nothing like face planting into a rose, too. So
you want to make sure you got sturdy shoes and on solid ground. Again, I want to emphasize that you use the right tool for each job. You can pick up for a couple of dollars at any kitchen gadget display in any of the grocery stores vegetable shears. And the thing I like about them is they cut at the very tip. And they're only $2, but they cut at the tip. So if you're doing delicate stuff with smaller roses, miniature varieties, or other things, you can get that in it. It's harder to get a Felco pruner into some of those areas.
It's almost like a bonsai tool or something.
Yeah, and much less expensive.
Sure.
But let's talk about, you've got all the equipment, you're ready to go, and you get out into the garden and you look at the rose bush that you want to be reducing and pruning. So there are 4 Ds of pruning. First of all, you're going to look for the dead wood. If it's dead, folks, it doesn't grow anymore. And what it does do is it collects all of the diseased leaves and crap, and it just piles up, and it stifles the amount of air that the rose is getting. The more air that's circulating around your bushes, the fewer diseases you'll have. Remember, all those fungal diseases are airborne diseases. So we're talking about black spot and powdery mildew and rust and botrytis is all over the place with all this rain now.
Especially,
So you want to get in there and get rid of anything that's dead. Get rid of anything that's been damaged. I have smacked my rose bushes with the side of a hose, and they break if they're young. And they don't really repair themselves, but they cling on. And it's those kind of things that you want to get rid of. Dead wood or any damaged wood that has happened. A lot of times over the season you lose track and one cane is scratching against another cane and has peeled away
the
some
rubbing
of the stuff.
syndrome.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to get rid of any of that as well. You also want to look for diseased wood. If it's dead or sickly looking, cut it back. And if you're making cuts, and speaking of diseased canes, if you're making the cuts, make sure you look and see what the cut is like. If it's got a little brown spot in the center,
you still
keep
have
cutting.
there.
Cut a little bit lower until it's all nice green wood at the bottom.
Now, Joe, while you're talking about cutting on this diseased wood, what about disinfection of your tools before you move to the next rose bush so that you don't spread that disease?
If your garden is a pigsty and full of disease, I would be.
Have you been spying on my garden again?
I would quite eagerly swish some Lysol around. Some people say bleach, but I've ruined many pairs of blue jeans.
The 10% bleach thing, I'm not a fan either.
Nah, just Lysol's enough to disinfect it.
99% of all household germs.
Exactly. And you just want to make sure that's all gone, especially if you've got problems like a canker or something that is growing on the cane itself. You don't want to be spreading that around. But
now, is there? I'm sorry to interrupt, but is there a time?
Interrupt.
Is there a time?
This is not a lecture, folks.
This is what I do best on the radio, folks. Is interrupt guests.
That's right. Nobody's going to talk to you.
So, if you are pruning a rose bush that has rust was one of those diseases that when I was a professional rose grower in greenhouse settings and hydroponically, was just the bane because there are so few things you can do other than mechanical control. There are some sprays, but they're pretty horrendous. So is there a time of day that is recommended for pruning or weather condition recommended for pruning? I don't think anybody's out there in the rain doing it right now.
I have.
There you go. So you see. So
when you work for a living, you've only got a weekend, and if it's raining,
tootin'. Yeah, you take it when you can, or the headlights at night.
It's only water.
It's only water. Dang it! We're not going to melt. We're not made of brown sugar. We're gardeners. So my question is there a way to reduce the amount of spread of something? Because like rust, you can get it on your pant leg and move it to the next plant.
Well, yeah, they're airborne, so they have spores, and it's there. If the neighbors across the fence haven't done anything and their roses are just rust magnets, the spores are going to be in the neighborhood. One of the things that I found is that the rose hybridizers over the last 20 years or so have gotten much better against rust. That's one thing. If you get a more modern rose, you're less likely to have it than some of those old garden roses or the hybrid teas from the 70s and earlier. They just don't have the same resistance that's been put into them. Yeah. So at any rate, we're talking about diseased wood. You want to make sure that you remove as much of that as possible. And this is variety specific. I have a couple of varieties where I've made cuts and then I get dieback. And this variety does that. The other varieties could care less. You cut them off and they grow with the bud eye.
Now, what are you doing with all of this material that you're pruning off? Are you composting that? Or
I do not compost any rose material.
Okay.
It carries just all kinds of stuff with it. Good. Insect eggs that are not what
hatched
you want. And not beneficial ones,
and
destructive ones.
Certainly the pathogens that are present on them.
All of those diseases are right there. And so I chop everything up and put it in the yard waste and get it out of my property. Now, so we talked about dead wood, getting rid of anything that's dead, getting rid of anything that's damaged, and anything that's diseased. And the last D of the 4 Ds of pruning is anything that's demented. For whatever reason, a new cane starts growing and runs into another one, so it makes a 90-degree turn and goes off this way, and then it runs into another one and goes straight up. Well, it looks very healthy on the top, but as you go down into the bush, it's only going to be capturing stuff. So your goal in pruning is to reduce the shrub by about a third or even half. Remember, keep in the back of your mind, you're not going to hurt the rose bush by pruning it down.
Now, my mother loved her roses, and growing up, she would enlist help from my father to go out and prune the roses. She had these nice big rose bushes, and I remember one time, and it might have been the last time she asked him to prune, when she came out to see the work that was done, there were like 3 or 4 canes per bush that were each about 12 inches tall. He had cut them almost 3/4 away. Now, they did still grow, and they bloomed with a few big roses. But is that true, that old myth of, well, if the harder you cut, the fewer blooms you'll get, but the bigger they'll be? Or is that just entirely variety specific?
No, that's absolutely the case. I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of the people that are showing roses, they'll grow maybe 3 bushes of a rose called moonstone, which is a big white rose.
Go figure.
And they'll they'll grow those 3 bushes and allow only one bud
to
on one cane.
Interesting.
So they will prune back everything. By the way, these are not gardens that, this is not Philoloa. You're not going to say, oh, my God, how beautiful.
Walk through and go, yeah, right.
These are show people, and they're breeding roses to be 7, 8 inches in diameter, on the size of a cantaloupe, for God's sake. At any rate, so the more you prune, the fewer flowers you'll have, but the bigger one, they'll be bigger. That's a sort of a general rule. It is true. And let me also say that I had a couple of climbing roses on the side of my house, and I was getting the house painted, and it was about this time of year, sunny and dry, but I knew how careful my house painter was going to be with my roses. So I pruned these climbing roses down to a stub of about 3 inches. So if they got stepped on as he was walking around the side of the house there painting away, it wouldn't split the bud. It wouldn't split the bud union.
Split the bud union and the main cane.
So if he stepped on it, it would just push it into the ground a little bit.
Right.
And I swear, 4 months later, you wouldn't even know they were the brand new canes coming up out of the thing. Because the roots, when you're pruning, you're not doing anything to the rootstock or to the root system.
The root system.
Yeah, the root system is established, and the older and
provided you haven't cut below the bud graft.
Yeah, you cut below the bud graft. You just cut off the thing. Your bud graft should be sitting right on the soil, keeping it nice and moist for new canes called basal breaks. Anyway, if you take your hand, everybody do this right now. Stop. Take your hand. Put the back of your hand down on a flat surface like a table. Now, spread your fingers out as much as you can, and then slowly lift them up. And that's exactly the end result of pruning a hybrid tea. So you want to make sure that there is a bud eye. That's where the new cane's going to grow, where your fingernails all are, so that the new canes are going to grow out and away from the plant. So you keep the center of the plant absolutely open. And you can cut them. I usually make about a 45-degree angle, especially if I'm doing it in the rain, because I don't want water to sit on the top of the cut. If you're in a hurry and it's sunny weather, it doesn't matter. Just cut them and make sure that the bud eye is going out. The first thing you want to remove from the cane as you're looking at it is any of the canes that have grown across the center of the plant.
Right.
You want to make sure that center is open. Remember I said you want to get the sunlight on the bud union, and you want to keep that bud union moist. So there'll be new canes. Next year's canes will be coming out come about May, after the first flush of blooms. You'll start seeing some basal breaks, new canes coming up. And so one of the things that you also should be, especially if you've got 100-some rose bushes to prune, you want to make sure that you're pruning with the fewest number of cuts. So take a look at the rose bush, study the rose bush, and if it looks like that cane's got to go, get your loppers and cut it at the bud.
So we're kind of talking carpenter advice here: measure twice, cut once.
Yeah, but and look at it so that you're not snipping a little here and then snipping a little here. And because one of the things that will happen, and this is just what happens, the more time you spend studying the rose to be pruned, the smaller that rose bush is going to get.
Well, I've always likened pruning to similar to cutting hair. I can always take more off if I need to, but I can't put any back on.
Yeah.
But you're saying just the opposite, that just figure it out in advance and take off the right piece and call it done.
Yeah. And a lot of the varieties produce these little stubby things that grow further down. I happen to prefer having nothing growing on the canes coming from the bud union that are, I don't know, 12, 18 inches down. I don't want anything growing down way below.
That low,
yeah. But it's not going to produce the flowers you want. You want the flowers up here on top.
Well, they tend to be much skinnier and weaker anyway.
Exactly. So any of those little stubby things, all they do is catch the diseased leaves that fall down.
Sucking hormones out of the rest of the plant.
Exactly. So make sure you cut anything. For most hybrid teas, cut away anything that's smaller in diameter than a pencil. Just keep them clean. You want a couple of good canes, and you want the new growth to be going outside and over out. I don't know. The other things to talk about are some problems, and I think we'll probably get to those after the break here in a minute. But just finishing up, one of the things that you want to make sure you do is to get rid of anything that's around the plant. So if you can scrape
you're talking about all the detritus and the leaves and all the stuff on the soil.
I mean, roses lose their leaves. We were very fortunate this year, and we had about a week of freezing low 30s.
Frosty.
And that's great because, one of the things that we deal with here on the coast is that roses that back in Ohio or definitely in Buffalo, New York, they have gone dormant.
They're underneath about a foot of snow in many cases.
They're very well protected. But out here, they're never really dormant. I have flowers on my roses.
I do too, yeah
so
several of them.
Don't worry about those flowers. They're probably going to, with all this rain and constant moisture, they're going to get all kinds of botrytis. So don't worry about them. Cut them away. Yeah. And one of the things that you're trying to do by pruning is force them into dormancy. And it's just one more step. We've had some cold weather. They've lost a lot of their leaves. This rainstorm that we've been having for the last 2 weeks is warm weather.
Yeah, it has been warmer, and that brings up a quick question, is that, as with many of the fruit trees, and I know people back east and in the middle of the country are facing some of this now where they've warmed up and then they'll be going back into a freeze. A lot of their fruit trees are actually budding out right now. Peaches are budding out, and the early fruit is starting to bud. With roses, roses are some of the toughest plants I've ever known. When I lived in the northern Sierras, we'd go to 10 below every winter, and my roses would be under snow, but they'd come back fine, in the springtime. But what about right now? If we go and prune right now and we see that you're saying that even if they're still flowering right now, go ahead and prune them. Definitely knock them back.
It's better to do a little bit of pruning than nothing at all.
Nothing at all. Yeah.
It will cutting off the edge, cutting off any of the new growth, the growth that's on them now. Those canes are spindly. There's not enough light in the sky.
And it's not one of those things where we have to wait for the sap to drop. No. We just go out there and do it. You don't have to wait for a hard freeze before you prune.
And to me, nothing is prettier than a rose garden that's been fully pruned. Because then everything is starting fresh and new. And if you've got the right shape to your rose bush, you're doing fine.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I don't let you or anybody else into my garden.
Well,
I'm going to work on it, though, I promise.
When
I get home.
My feeling is they're like kids. Don't have any more than you can care for. Thank you. My personal opinion, and I don't know.
Excepting we never have to send them to college or pay for it. So,
okay. Well, I think
that should be a good segue for a break.
All right. We'll be back to talk more about stuff about pruning your roses.
Or your children.
In just a second.
And we're back. This is KSQD Santa Cruz, KSQD 90.7 FM, and streaming at ksqd.org. This is In the Garden. I'm Stephen E. Popp, and we're here with my friend and colleague, Joe Truskot, and we're talking about rose care in the winter.
Oh, it's a wonderful time to be in the garden. Maybe not right now at this minute.
Unless
but,
you like rain.
Yeah, I mean, I've already been out there. I got part of my pruning done, and one of the suggestions I have is if you have a normal kind of yard, you should know something about the amount of light and heat certain segments of your garden are getting. So I always make it a point to prune the roses that are growing in the on the north side of a fence, because
the darker side,
it's dark and they're not getting the light that the other side of the yard in the sunny south part, south facing or east facing areas get. So I start my pruning in the darkest spot and work my way through over to the areas that I prune last are in the sunniest and warmest, and the whole point of doing all of this is they all start growing and are on the same schedule.
So those ones on the northern side of your garden, it's not that you prune them harder than anything else.
Nope.
Prune them the same, but then as the sun's arc increases into summertime, everything's getting equal light and growing on the same schedule.
Yeah. So when you have your garden party and everyone's over to see high rosestide in your yard.
We still haven't found the people from the last party we had.
I know. They kind of wandered off.
Yeah.
But at any rate, that will keep the garden sort of going. Now, I have a couple of more things about it. Mostly I was talking about hybrid teas.
Yeah, there's different types of roses, different species.
Yeah, and so I want to talk a little bit about something called a floribunda, which is a cross between a hybrid tea and a polyantha or multi-flowered rose. So you get more of those sprays, a whole sort of bouquet.
There is a rose
stem.
called a spray rose. Yeah, it's a baby rose type thing.
Yeah, but these are sort of they have hybrid tea shapes, but they're smaller flowers and they grow in clusters.
Much smaller.
Yeah, and that's a floribunda. So you're going to do a little lighter pruning on those. Leave a few more of the smaller canes because you want more flowers on a floribunda, as opposed to a hybrid tea, where you want that classic, beautiful shape that they get. Now, the other roses, let's divide them up into two areas. One of them is sort of shrub roses. They're big, they're bulky, they take a lot of pruning. Those are things that you want to control and for the space that you have for them, because they will often get bigger.
Now, what's the difference between a shrub rose and a tree rose?
Well, a tree rose is actually three different rose bushes. You have one variety that's the rootstock. You have another variety that's the standard or the cane that lifts it up. And then you have a hybrid tea or a floribunda that's been grafted onto the top.
So you have two graft points.
You have three.
Oh,
yeah,
three.
Two. Yeah, one at the root center and one at the top.
Right.
And you want to prune the hybrid teas that are up at the top the same way that you would prune a hybrid tea in your garden, maybe a little bit more, because they have recently they've grafted some of the hybrid teas that are big. I mean, some of these hybrid teas grow 5-6 feet.
Yeah.
But if you put that on a standard, it's now 9 feet in the air.
Well, I was just going to say that standard piece, which you could almost look like as an internodal piece on a plant, but it's not. It's a grafted piece of standard stock. That itself isn't going to grow. It's only what's above that bud union.
And
it's not going to expand or get any taller.
If you look closely at all the tree roses that are on the market and look at the standard, the upright part, you'll notice that they have knifed out all of the bud eyes. in
So
that
it's not
whole
going to be
cane.
suckering out from that.
It's not going to be growing off from the side. It will try to if that's not done. But let's talk a little bit about climbing roses.
So I've got a question for you about climbing
Oh,
roses.
you do?
I do.
Good.
So when I was a grower of roses for cut flowers, the majority of what we grew were hydroponically grown. And the setup was we had these long, narrow sort of racks that we had pots that were about 10 by 12 inch size and about 12 inches tall with a inorganic material in them, and we had 3 rose bushes in each of those. We would, as a regular practice, something we learned from some Dutch growers, we would go in with a pair of pliers and we would take a cane and pinch it close to the base and bend it down, called bent cane. And when we did that, at that bend point, that junction, it would initiate breaks, and we could get, in fact, we would rate the roses by how many breaks they got at each bent cane, but it would initiate these breaks, which then would be flowers. So we were increasing the flower production for cut flower purposes. Does that have anything to do with climbing roses as well?
Stephen, I'm glad you asked that question. We haven't rehearsed this, but let me respond.
This is all live radio impromptu.
Let me respond. That's
do.
exactly what you want to have in a climbing rose. So you want to first, as it's growing, the first couple of years, it will take some time for it to develop an upright cane. We're talking about, let's say, a rose that you want to put on your fence. Your fence is 6-7 feet tall. You planted the rose at the base of the fence. You get it up. The first couple of years, you support it, and then finally it gets higher and higher up onto the fence itself. And then what you want to have happen is you want those things to go, once they're at the top of the fence, horizontal.
It's that funny French word, right, with an E?
Yeah, well, it was espalier, but not really.
Not exactly.
Not
because
really.
It's still going to be full. It's not going to be
right,
flat.
because you want it to go up, and you will still get some side growth on climbing roses, but eventually you want it to go up and across the top of the I'm making these really beautiful hand gestures here.
Yeah, I know. You are. You're quite dynamic here today. A lot of
they seem to be rather useless in this medium.
Well, we can see.
Anyway, when you get to the top, you've got a horizontal cane, and just as Stephen was explaining, at every bud eye, and by the way, every time there is a rose leaf, one of those five little leaflet petal things growing out, right at the juncture of the cane and that leaf is a bud eye. So when that leaf falls off, there is something in there that will grow out and become another cane. So what you have happen as these are stretched off across the top of a fence, every one of those little bud eyes will send up a flower spray. So that's how you get a full fence full of flowers.
Which is wonderful to keep the neighbors' kids from climbing over the fence.
Yeah.
Now, what I was describing with bent cane process was what we were doing is we were cutting off the meristemic hormone going to the growing point and returning it back to that point. Same thing's happening then?
Well,
I mean, are you bending or are you cutting or pruning to that bud eye?
Many of the climbing roses that have been out on the market are they've bred in with a couple of different varieties, species roses that are very lax. They're not, the hybrid teas tend to be very stiff and they're harder to move around. But a climbing rose usually sends out a long cane, and those are the canes that you want to encourage to grow. You when you get them on the top, you do have to tie them because they don't cling. They're not like honeysuckle or mistletoe. But what or not mistletoe, poison ivy or any of those other horrible things that trumpet.
Well, now I have to. Speaking of horrible things, and I know this is maybe sacrilege to talk about naming a rose as being horrible, but I have a rose growing in my garden that I truly regret ever having planted. It was something called a Scotch rose, I believe, but it happens to have been Claude Monet's favorite rose at Giverny, called Mermaid. Mermaid is a single yellow flowering climbing rose that is the rose from hell. It grows thorns that are recurved and could be used in place of barbed wire.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with it. I've never been able to kill it. I can't even prune it anymore.
Do you remember those neighbors that have the track?
Yeah.
I would relocate Mermaid. It's a hybrid Bracteata, and the Bracteatas are very thorny, and we're talking about hypodermic needle strength.
Oh, yeah, concertina wire. It's just razor sharp.
It is absolutely.
It grabs you. I think I found a skeleton in there one time. It was just somebody.
If you want some protection, I've suggested it to several city council members who are complaining about graffiti. All you need is a couple of mermaid plants on that place that keeps getting tagged, and those kids won't do it again. They may try, but they're not going to get away with it twice.
And if you need starter stock, I've got a sale on for you.
And if they're looking for DNA sources, you're going to find a trail of blood leading away from the mermaid.
Pieces of clothing hanging in place.
Now, one of the things that you will find with hybrid climbing roses is you do want to prune them, because the more you prune them, but as we were talking about that cane, last year's canes may have come up, you leave a little stub. You leave about an inch stub, and when it's blooming time again, the bud eyes that are in those little studs or stubs will send out even more little stalks for roses, and you'll have just this incredible flush of flowers. So there are some easy things that you can do that will keep these roses going for you. Now, anything else I want to talk about? I mean, first of all, let's make sure that you prune a little bit. I mean, there have been some serious scientific tests in which they couldn't get around to doing the fancy pruning that I would do in my garden for the few roses that I have. Sure. So they got a hedge clipper and just went through the whole thing and just buzzed them all clean. And, in about 2 months, there was no noticeable difference. There might be some leftover dead wood and stuff like that is in them, but the fact that they got some kind of pruning benefited them.
But not the pruner who did not receive the mental calmness and action of meditation through going through the pruning process.
Well, that all depends on how many roses you have to do.
Okay, so there's some cursing involved, too.
There are several members of the Monterey Bay Rose Society who have many, maybe 600 roses that they're growing. They don't have time to be fooling around. They're getting in there and they're moving through that pretty quickly. Yeah. How
about wound treatment if you're making some major cuts?
It's not necessary. If you are using a very sharp shears with a finely honed blade,
you're not leaving a ragged cut.
Yeah, you don't want. If you're tearing the cane apart, you're doing it wrong.
And what is a good time with pruning, talking of cutting roses, when would be a good time to do grafting of roses if you wanted to graft something?
Well, it in their natural cycle. The same thing with if you wanted to experiment with growing a rose seed. You can do that, and now's a good time because it's a natural cycle. They've put out their fruit, and the fruit has seeds, and that's a rose hip. If you want to split open a couple of those, now is a good time to split them open and extract the seeds from those pods. And I do think that everyone should give it a try. It's like having babies. I was so proud of mine, and I grew it, and then I went out of town and forgot to water it.
Speaking of taking care of your children.
Yeah, I know. It was a terrible calamity, and I'm very sorry. I apologize.
How long will those seeds in that rose hip stay good? I mean, if you pick them, they're going to dry up and kind of not be viable after a short while. But can you leave them on the rose and then pick them off?
Yeah, I mean, now's the time you get them. Because
you want to get rid of them now anyway. So.
Yeah, you're going to be pruning them off, so they'll be in your hand. If you split them open, one of the things that they do need some cold weather. So what I normally do is a couple of the rose hips that were on roses that I like a lot, I will split them open, extract the seeds, put them in a damp, not wet, paper towel, and put them in the vegetable bin in my refrigerator.
So another one of those fancy words, vernalization.
Vegetable bin. Then check on them because you don't want them to mold, but you want to keep them moist, and then plant them. Come February, put them in.
So they'll last that long.
They'll last that as long as they don't get too dry. They'll be okay dried out, but you'll get a better response if they're in the natural cycle of blooming. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there's no point in feeding your roses at this point. Right. After you've pruned, it's more important for you to rake around and get rid of all the dead leaves and the other crap. But you don't want to necessarily be pruning at this time because it's not going to do you any good. Nothing's going to happen. And
maybe put on a little layer of mulch after you've swept it all up.
That would be great. Now, the first time that you see some growth and these bud eyes are opening up, that's the time where I advise everybody to go to the feed store and get a big bag of alfalfa pellets. Alfalfa pellets, it's just rabbit food, and I like to put them on. Now would be a little bit too soon. But it's very easy to grab a handful of that stuff and throw it at the base of not only roses but everything else in it. It has an enzyme in it that serves as a tonic. It's called triacontanol, and it's I guess a kind of alcohol that is in the.
Stimulates microorganism growth.
It does that. It has some nutritional value to it. Certainly it provides organic material to the rose, but it's a great tonic, and it allows triacontanol allows the plant to absorb whatever nutrients are in the soil. So you don't start feeding until you see at least 6 inches of new growth with opened leaves, several open leaves, and then the sun is stronger by March, so the days are getting much longer, and that's when you really want to add a balanced fertilizer.
And one caveat about using the alfalfa pellets, particularly if they're rabbit food, in my case, I'll have rabbits at my roses.
Well, a couple of good rains will swell up those things. You could,
they decompose pretty quickly.
Yeah,
I could pre-soak them maybe.
In your case, get a 33-gallon garbage can. Pour the rabbit pellets in that, fill it with some water, and stir it around, let it ripen a couple of days, and then get whatever kind of bucket or hose or scoop you want, stir it around, and then apply it to all your plants.
We're making a tea.
Yeah, it's a tea of sorts, but it really is beneficial, and it adds a lot of vigor to the plant itself. Anyway, we'll announce some more rose pruning workshops.
See everyone again here on the radio next week.
Happy gardening, folks. It's a great time to be alive.
Get wet. Stay safe.
Exactly. Stay positive.
Happy
Thank
gardening.
you all. See you next time.
Bye.